Okay, so if we can have the screen sharing disabled for a minute. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so have the screen sharing. All right, well, okay. Welcome to the Smart Research Symposium, everyone. So glad you're here. This event is primarily organized to learn from distinguished scholars from across the globe, all of whom have made notable contributions in the realm of social media, communication, and analytics. So these experts hail from diverse academic fields, and their insights promise to shed light on complex topics. Today, we are lucky to have Dr. Marc Smith, and he will be delving into the topic of charting collections of connections in social media. Dr. Smith is a sociologist renowned for his research on online communities and computer-mediated interactions. And he's also affiliated with Stanford University and co-founded the Social Media Research Foundation, a nonprofit devoted to tools, data, and scholarship related to social media research. So if you want to know what this foundation is, let me just give you a brief insight. NodeXL, you might have heard of it. It's a project that analyzes social media networks, accessible to most users of the Excel spreadsheet application. Our social interactions span tweets, posts, and more, often overshadowing our face-to-face encounters. While social media can be overwhelming, using appropriate tools and insights from social sciences certainly helps decipher key trends and relationships. So, and as these interactions evolve into data, new analytical tools become essential. And I must say that NodeXL is one of those tools that has profoundly impacted our instructional methodology and the trajectory of our overall research endeavors. So I'm confident that you will leave today's session with valuable insights, and this is a symposium that you do not want to miss. So I wouldn't keep you waiting any longer, as we all eagerly await Marc's insights. Over to you, Marc. You're welcome to share your screen.
Dr. Khan, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for that introduction. I'm a sociologist, and I'm very interested in technology and society. I'm interested in the idea of collective action. Sociologists often are interested in the notion of collective action. It's what differentiates us from psychologists. They care about sort of one or fewer people, and we care about two or more people. And sociologists have this notion of collective action. It's two or more people doing something together, often generating a result that no individual by themselves could have achieved. So in our language, we have phrases like "it takes two to tango." There are many things that just take more than one human to achieve. My particular focus over the last 30 years, I guess, at this point, is to explore what happens when collective action is changed when computers are involved. So the longer phrase, I think, for the subject of interest as a sociologist is computer-mediated collective action. And many of us have experienced this. This is the phenomena that takes place when you swipe or tap. It's when you join a discussion group, a WhatsApp chat, a Twitter hashtag, a Facebook group, a LinkedIn community. It's a place where people create connections, typically with other people or other entities. It could be an institution. It could be the university itself has an account. But these entities generate content. They create messages. And in addition to the messages and the pictures and the videos, people are creating connections. And connections are really important. Connections are the thing that are created when you're swiping and tapping, forwarding and following and friending and favoriting. You're creating links between you and this other entity. And that entity is being linked to by other people, and those people are linking, and so on and so on and so on. And so on the screen in front of us, we have a kind of example, a methodological and empirical, quantifiable digital example of a form of computational social science. It's a way of looking at computer-mediated collective action. In this case, it's the widely discussed "Oh yeah" hashtag in the platform formerly known as Twitter, now X. We can talk a little bit about what's happening there. But we're broadly interested in building tools that facilitate doing initially 5 tasks. We now have learned from our users that they actually want 7 tasks. Those 5 tasks are they want to be able to collect data from social media and store it. That's 2 tasks. They want to analyze it, they want to visualize it, and they would like to write reports about this data. And so those are 5 major user tasks that many scholars, students, researchers, analysts need to perform. And unless you know that Python is not just a snake, you may not know how to do that. And this is a bit of a challenge, that it's just hard to know how to get your hands on the data, where to put it, how to grind it and analyze it, hard to communicate a picture of it, hard to write a report about it. We've made that a lot easier. Within a few seconds, we just started at the top of the hour. I opened up this is Node Excel. And within a few clicks, I clicked on a menu here. I'm in an Excel ribbon here. And if I go into this ribbon, I see I've got menu areas like data, graph, visual properties, analysis, options, show, hide, help. Those are the little subtitles for the menu divisions. These buttons are all the buttons you need, we think, all the buttons you're going to need to do those 5 things: the collect it, store it, analyze it, visualize it, write a report about it. To get this data, I just went into the data menu. I went into data import, and here you can see some of the, well, all of the endpoints from which we facilitate the extraction of social media data. You can go to other network applications like UCINet or Gephi, one of the finest network visualization tools out there, or PIAC, one of the most advanced in terms of calculations and libraries of metrics. We'll read and write their files. We'll also bring it in from CSV files, but we can also import from Flickr, wikis, Reddit, the platform formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, and also WhatsApp, YouTube, and more recently, as things have changed over at X, we've added the ability to import from commercial data providers. And so in your classwork, you may have encountered some of these already. I'll say some of the names of the ones that we currently support, and a couple of names of the ones that we will support in the not too distant future. Brandwatch is, I think, the big one on the block, but there's also Talkwalker and Tweetbinder. Special shout out to Tweetbinder. They've been very cooperative, especially as graduate students suddenly ran out of data in the middle of many projects. Node Excel users sort of earlier in the year, there were changes over at Twitter/X, and what had been, what I have to say, one of the best industry standard, gold standard data access for academics on the old Twitter platform, that's gone. That's gone. So we have adapted. One of the adaptations is that we now support your use of commercial data providers, some of whom have nonprofit and educational pricing. And Tweetbinder's been pretty, I think, industry leading in affordability. So we've been very happy in collaborating with them. But there are others. There's Meltwater, Sprout Social, Sprinkler, TrueScope. I've missed a few. I apologize to those for whom I've missed their service. But then we've also implemented this, which is a web scraper. And that will web scrape the platform formerly known as Twitter. And so data is possible to get. It's just, it's likely to take time, and it's uncertain how long these methods of access will continue to work. So caveat there. But we are diversifying into a variety of social media endpoints. And the goal is to make it so that you, typically a non-programmer, not necessarily, but typically a non-programming scholar, needs to be able to sort of get to the data, store it, analyze it, visualize it, write a report on it, this is how you do it. This is the dialog box. This is the import from X, formerly Twitter, search network 3.0 beta. And you type in your query. You can type in, I believe, all of the Twitter search functions, the ors, the nots, the groupings, the quotations, the parentheses, all of that works here. It's also somewhat interesting to note that you now have access to the beginning of the Twitter dataset. So you can go to 2006, 2007 from this. And you can log into Twitter and you can get data. And when you get that data, it takes something that looks somewhat like this format. We'll start over here in the Edges worksheet. Here is a place where each of the tweets or posts, whatever you want to call them, all of that information has been kind of filleted. It's been broken apart. I would argue that one of our core methodological differences, the differentiator for a network approach versus a lot of other approaches with which we are complementary, but we are different. And that is that we see messages not just as collections of words. They are collections of words, no doubt about it. Messages have collections of words. That's great. And that means sentiment, NLP, all of those kinds of word ranking, scoring, frequency distribution analysis methods, sentiment broadly, it's all good. But it misses something. And what it misses is that messages and these words don't just encode words or sentiment, they encode connections. They encode who did what, with whom, when and where. Those words, those questions may be familiar to you. They're the 5 W's. They teach that in journalism school. They're the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why, how. I think is you get 5 W's and an H, right? Your mileage may vary, but these are sort of the core questions. When somebody says, what happened? It's like, who did what, to whom, where, and when. And if you have that data, and you don't even necessarily have to have that data from social media, you can get a piece of paper or maybe a Google sheet, and you could type at the top of those columns who did what, with whom, when, where, and you could just start writing things down. You could maybe do it on your phone. After 20 or 30 of those observations, you start to have network. And when you have network, you have this other thing that you didn't have before. You have something we call structure. And social scientists love the word structure, but they used to say it a lot. And it kind of was a metaphor because and what's the difference between what it was and what it is? It's now a data structure. It's a form of representing the set of a group of things and the way those things connect to one another. And in that data, the pattern of connections from what we could call a collection of connections, in this case, a collection of annotated connections. There's messages, there's photographs, videos, there's something more than just A connected to B. It's A connected to B and did the what? Some message was sent. And so when we look at that, we now see what you're seeing here on the screen. We call these edges. Edges represent each row. Let's see here, make it a little bigger. Each row encodes an entity, one other entity, and the fact that they had one connection between them. And so if one person had 5 connections, there would be 5 rows for that person. A is to B, A is to C, A is to D, A is to E, A is to F. So if you see somebody and go, oh, well, A has connections with B, C, D, E, and F, we would see that as 1 row per connection. Can't have more than one other person you're connecting to in an edge. There's another data structure. It's called a pile sort. It's a different thing. We're not going to use that. This is one entity on the vertex 1 column, one entity on the vertex 2 column, and one connection encoded in that. So we go and get through this import menu data from a lot of sources. We'll get it from Reddit, most recently from WhatsApp, which is kind of cool. I'm going to jump over to our.
Taylor, I'm really sorry again. It's okay. No, my phone important.
Oh, thank you. uh, please come and visit us here at the NodeXL Graph Gallery at nodexlgraphgallery.org, where you'll see a site that is sort of like an Instagram for graphs. It's like Instagraph, but we're not going to use that name because we would get into a lot of trouble with Mr. Zuckerberg's attorneys. But what you're seeing here is a series of thumbnail images of networks. These networks were generated by NodeXL and then uploaded to the NodeXL Graph Gallery, where you may, as students, scholars, research analysts, may want to use our search engine up in the top corner. You may find that we have some networks of interest already. For example, if I type in Ohio U, I might get a bunch of maps that contain Ohio U as a word. And these may be for all sorts of topics. Ohio U is a big institution, has lots and lots of different contexts, but here it appears in higher ed. Here it appears just as a map of the word Ohio U, and then made today OU, oh yeah, the hashtag that we just looked at. If we drill down in the graph gallery, you get a thumbnail, now a larger image of that network, but you also get this little summary. And this summary is sort of the magic of network analysis. It's going to say that, there were 368 people who tweeted, oh, you, oh, yeah, over about a week. And that's a bunch of people. And they tweeted, let's see, how many times? There were a total number of retweets, 500 unique tweets. There were about 95 messages that were exchanged over this week. And in those messages, sometimes people mention other people. So 368 people got mentioned in all of this. And so we can then see all of the messages. And we don't just see them as text. We see them as the people and the way that those messages encode a connection to other people. And those connections happen when I do things like retweet you, reply to you, mention you, quote your tweet, mention you in a quoted tweet, or maybe I just tweet, which is when I put out a message and it has no usernames in it. I didn't mention or reply or retweet anybody. And you'll see those things appear in the graph. Those will be circles. That's when somebody tweeted, and the tweet basically points at them, because you have to have a vertex 2. Can't just have a vertex 1. And so if vertex 1 didn't mention anybody, who did they essentially link to? They linked to themselves. You could argue maybe they should link to Twitter, but Twitter doesn't exist anymore. And second, Twitter is or was an account, and you didn't actually connect to the @Twitter account. So that would be damaging the data. So we believe that the best practice is to just make you link back to yourself. So these maps provide us with a kind of, it's a atlas of social cyberspace. It's a way of visually representing how differently groups of people can connect to each other. Because I hope when you look at some of these images, you may already visually be saying to yourself, well, I see these round things in a lot of them. I see a lot of round things, but I also see some kinds of square things. That's interesting. See a lot of these squares. And then in some cases, I see lots of round things. Some of them have connections, sometimes they don't. There's a kind of structure to the crowd, the virtual crowd. And we can drill into these structures. And when we do, we're typically going to find that there's just a few people who are sort of the top people. The top meaning that they're in the center of the network. They're not just the people with lots of followers. They're not just the people with a lot of tweets. They're the people who, when we make up this network of a collection of connections, some people, their connections are not like the others. And I don't just mean they have more connections, because that's the beauty of network theory. It's not just about how much. It can be about how unique, how special. And so you can think sort of a thought experiment. Imagine a large corporation, and it's so big that there are separate divisions. And let's say there's sales, a marketing, and an engineering division. And there's somebody in sales, and they have 200 connections, but all of their connections are in sales. So they have 200 friends. They're very popular. They're the most popular person, guy, gal, person in sales. But then there's somebody also in sales. They only have 4 or 5 or 6 connections. But a few of those connections, let's just say one, it's over in engineering. Somebody in sales knows somebody in engineering. Who's the most important person? You could say, well, person one, 200 connections, certainly popular. Yes, they're popular, but are they influential? Do they have this network centrality property? And network centrality is something that can actually capture, measure, and identify the person in sales who has the one connection in engineering. And if the goal is to ask a question of somebody in engineering, having just one connection over to engineering makes you very, very valuable. You're the bridge, you're the broker, you're the gatekeeper. And so network theory quickly calculates using this notion of centrality, and there are many flavors of centrality. Being just popular, degree centrality, that's having 200 connections. Being central in a different sense, betweenness centrality, the bridge score, the how much are you the only person who crosses the divide. You can imagine maybe you have 2 friends groups, the work people and the school people, and you're the only person who knows people in both groups. You're the bridge between those different clusters. So we can now take the tool, it's like a telescope, it's like a microscope, it's like an X-ray machine, and we can point it into a space like a camera. We can say that this is a peculiar kind of camera in that you don't take pictures of the physical world with it. You take pictures of the virtual world with it. And so what you're seeing is a kind of like aerial view of a crowd. And that crowd is not random. It has structure. And so those structures really tell us some important stories. And so let's see if I can move this and go over here. And that story gets told somewhat effectively, I think, with my talented co-authors at the Pew Research Center, and Itai Himmelbaum and Ben Schneiderman. This article is easily Googleable. If you type in Pew Research Node XL, you'll end up at mapping Twitter topic networks from polarized crowds to community clusters. And the main takeaway, there's a lot here, and there's a methodological guidebook. It sort of tells you how you could do this work too. And then, of course, there is the book, but that's another thing. And we also have a new handbook, the manual, the newly released guide. So I'll make sure to get that link into the chat before we end today. The guide is out. What you're seeing here is a kind of Rosetta Stone, a kind of decoding code book for looking at what we were just looking at, the images of all those networks. And what it is intended to show you is that they're not all the same. There is a perhaps infinity of potential network structures. There's an infinity of the ways that some set of things can all connect to each other. Actually, it's 2 times n squared is for a bounded population, but there's a lot of different possible network structures out there. But in reality, in natural occurrence, if we go looking for them, there are only about 6 network structures that seem common. Now, I really want to make the caveat here that we are not saying that there is not a 7th network structure out there. We're saying that, like the physicists who keep showing up with new elements for the periodic table, you are welcome to add your network structure as soon as we have evidence. And we are looking for that evidence. We are looking for what are the other common network structures that not could occur, but do occur in social media. We would like to see it. We, so far, have mapped several million of these networks, and we see these 6 patterns. And these 6 patterns are divided, unified, fragmented, clustered, and the in and the out, hub and spoke. And so these patterns reveal some of the types of variations that people can create, not even knowing that they're doing so, right? Each of us goes there and we scroll and we tap and we pick who we want to follow and who will retweet and who will reply to. But in aggregate, something emerges. Patterns emerge, even though we may not know that we're a part of it, but we're in this larger pattern. We're in this structure. And we would like to know what's the whole shape of the crowd. So let's see, I've got some nifty photos, I think, to illustrate this. So the phenomena sort of resembles this. This is my visual metaphor for hashtag, email list, discussion group. And first, I'll say it's beautiful. These are starlings. This is called a mummeration of starlings. It's mesmerizing. It's kind of beautiful. But in some ways, it works, right? People just come out of their own volition. They come together. They kind of flock together around a topic. And from day to day, you don't know that you're going to go back to that hashtag or that discussion. You just do what you do. So nobody's telling you what to do. And nobody's telling these birds what to do. But each of them is making a decision on its own. Typically, they have a very simple rule: try to follow the bird in front of you. And as a result, some very complex patterns can emerge. So that's the positive side of the visual metaphor. There is a negative side of this visual metaphor, and that is it's misleading, especially when you try to apply it to humans. Because what is it about these birds that's different from humans? Well, if humans were birds, we would be chickens because they have a pecking order. So the thing that makes humans completely different from these birds is that all of these birds are equal. There is no boss bird. There is no big bird. There is no dominant bird with more power and more influence who is telling the other birds what to do. Even the goose at the front of the V, when they go, over the sky with the front goose, is not the boss bird. And if anything, he's working or she's working harder than the other birds, sort of that turbulent wind thing. So what we're interested in what way is this wrong? And the answer is there is no hierarchy. There is no stratification of power. And so we need a better metaphor. We need one that is going to capture the fact that different positions in the graph actually have different kinds of influence or power. And so it is true that volume, and volume is sort of what you get when you go to Brandwatch, Meltwater, Sprout Social, Sprinkler, Talkwalker, Tweetbinder, Metricool. All of these guys, Getwork gals, they measure the volume of stuff. How many tweets on this topic? We measure the structure. It's sort of like wanting to understand an animal by actually seeing its skeleton. And I guess those dinosaur people have had a great deal of success with that skeleton stuff. So we're in the same boat. We would like to not just know that there are 10 dots, we'd like to know how the dots are related to one another. And we do this because we think knowing how many things are in the box is not a good predictor of what is in the box. So 717 Lego bricks, exactly the same number of Lego bricks, but one's Minecraft and one is X-Wing Fighter. And so they can't be the same. And having just a measure, a volume, it's not enough. So we want to draw a picture of the structure of social media, or at the very least, a picture of the structure of collections of annotated connections. And we want that to be easy. We want it to be fast, quick, because we want you to take pictures the way that you do with your phone. Just snap, 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 snap. You don't really put that much, planning into it. It's, I need a picture of that. I take a picture of that. We want you to take pictures of crowds that are talking about the topics that we're all talking about. We want to understand the shape of social media. And so what would a hashtag look like? It's not like that. That's not enough. So let me quickly go through the idea of why we draw the data, because we're going to draw the data. We're going to visualize it. I don't know if you've encountered this, Francois Anscombe's quartet. In that case, I see some heads nodding. Okay, I'll go quickly through this. So the task I ask our viewers to do with this data is, two of the data points are probably either errors or outliers. I'd like you to find the two data points and tell me which ones we should remove. And then of the four distributions here, one of them is least like the others. I'd like to remove it. I'd like you to tell me which one. So two data points to remove, one data set to remove. which one's why. Now, a lot of people go, well, you need statistics. And Francois Anscombe, he's a clever guy. All four have the same statistics. They all have the same means, medians, modes. They're all the same. So typically we dwell on this slide in these talks, and I'll say something like, well, that's 6 or 8 of us, and that's 6 or 8 human minutes, brain minutes, have been spent trying to analyze this data, and we're not getting anywhere. It's just not happening easily anyway. And yet, in the next slide, when I reveal it, your brain will answer both of those questions. Find the 2 outlier or error data points, and which of the 4 will be removed. And it'll do it in somewhere between 300 and 400 milliseconds. And when it does it, it makes a noise. When your brain has this experience, it may be culturally variable. In my culture, my brain makes this noise. It goes, oh. So you may have that happen. Let's see. Let's go to the next slide. We'll see if your brain makes that sound. Oh. Okay, I know where I'm going to, that data point, number 4, out of the pool. That was easy. That went really fast. And so part of the mission of our group is to replace cognition with perception. There's a lot that our brains do through perception that doesn't really have to rise to the level of cognition. Eventually, we do want cognition. Don't get me wrong. We want you to think, but we want you to be able to perceive data. You could argue that this required cognition. That was a lot of heavy lifting for our brains. This required perception. This was really good. Brains are eating this up all day, every day. I mean, if you can see this. And so we would like to leverage the other modalities of knowing, of perception, to help people understand. And so to do that, we need to draw some pictures, and those pictures should serve some functions like telling us about the structure and the dynamics, critical events, what's being spoken about, how it's moving through the graph, and then new for 2016, invasion and manipulation. In order to know what is abnormal about social media, we are going to need to know a lot about what's normal about social media. And we don't, because we really don't know social media. And so what we want to do is make it possible to track and visualize these kinds of virtual crowds. And so physical crowds, we agree, when you and 750,000 of your closest friends gather, all sorts of things can happen next. But we all just went through a long period in which crowds were semi-toxic, and you couldn't really do crowd from like 2020 to, well, for a couple of years, really. So crowds were dangerous, but instead we crowded into social media. We found ourselves in crowds in social media, and we still are. Now we're in hybrid, where they're virtual and physical crowds. You might be tweeting and texting and posting while you're in the crowd, you're at the concert, you're at the event, you're doing something. And so we would also like to be able to read these tweets and answer certain kinds of questions, like who is the most influential person tweeting about this topic? Are there subgroups, segments, clusters, subcommunities, groups, divisions within this larger population? Is this really a monolithic group, or is it a bunch of smaller scattered crowds? Who are those leaders in those crowds? What are they talking about? What was the peak event? And so we could start reading tweets, whatever you want to call them these days. I believe, though, that there's a big mismatch between the human animal as a data collection and analysis entity and the problem we're faced with. I'll put it this way. When the World Cup was happening and Twitter was still super popular, just as an example of a social media platform, it was generating 6,000 tweets about the World Cup every second. Okay, now I have looked into this, and I find that humans seem to consume tweets at the rate of roughly 10 per minute, especially when they're trying to understand that you're reading them for, you're not just scrolling, you're reading this because you're doing research on what do people say about OU? What do people say about the sports team or the politician or the brand or the topic or the issue or the policy? 10 a minute is how many an hour? And that's 600 an hour. How many a day? Well, you're not going to do this for 8 hours a day. You can't. So I'm going to give you 3 or 4 hours. I'm going to spot you roughly, what is it, 2,400 to maybe 4,000 tweets in a day. How many tweets were being generated around the World Cup? 6,000 tweets per second. You're not the right animal, or at least you don't belong in the gear system right at the rock face. You don't, it is not the right thing for you to be reading every one of those messages. I'm not saying that you shouldn't read some of these messages. You should. Comprehension matters. We need to sort of have, there's hermeneutics, there's meaning in the data. It's true. But what we need is a machine like a cotton gin for social media. We need some way of threshing the data into that higher level representation, like the visualization, where your brain can give you an answer that goes, oh. So how do we do that? How do we turn this list of tweets into, oh, who are the leaders? What are the factions? What are they talking about? We can drill in. We don't have to read 6,000 tweets a second because we can. And we probably even should not read 6,000 tweets a day, because what we should do is have a method that would lead us to the right tweet, the right person, the right day, the right hour, the right minute, to say, this is important, and therefore I'm going to take what is a precious, scarce resource, human attention. And intelligent, talented, skilled human attention with methods, wow, is that a scarce resource? So we need to use your precious knowledge and awareness and capability to interpret. We need to direct it to the right thing. And so this is a way, and no doubt needs improvement. Sometimes people have criticized visualizations of networks and said, if I drive through a swarm of bugs, my windscreen looks like this. I don't know where the data is in this. I'm not getting the intuition. Valid critique. However, I like to say that this is somewhat like it's a baby with the bathwater kind of a thing. There are bad photographs. I think we can all agree. There are plenty of people who can take a bad photograph. That doesn't mean that photography is. And so what we are looking at are improved methods for taking these images. You could argue that image one, that's out of focus, right? It's blurry. The shutter speed is too slow. Whatever metaphor from photography you want to bring into the discussion. But this is a badly rendered image. This is a marginally improved version of that image. You could argue, well, now we're in focus. Now we've got the right f-stop. We've got the right amount of light. So in this view, suddenly the clusters become very visible and distinct. The shapes inside those clusters become very visible and distinct. And you may start to recognize some of those shapes from things like the Pew report, where we're seeing, for example, in these images, broadcast. Broadcast is the probably most dominant pattern in social media. It's not all that social, you could say. It's not community. It's not reciprocity. It's one person saying things and a lot of people retweet. That's the dominant pattern in social media. And so we are looking at various alternative visualizations. There's sort of the 3D view of it. That's a possibility. But our main point is that social network analysis gives the observer three levels of analysis, where usually there's only two. Most social media tools will tell you about an individual, or they'll tell you about a population. There are 150,000 people who tweeted about such and such, and this person tweeted 47 times. Network analysis adds the middle layer, the meso. We have a micro, we have a macro, now we have a meso layer, which is this clustery, groupy, sub-segment kind of thing that only network analysis can identify. And this, when used together with sentiment, is much more powerful than either piece alone. So, for example, when you see people talking about a topic, but when they're in this cluster, it's a very negative orientation to that topic, but they're in this cluster, they have a positive orientation to the topic. The fact that they're saying the same words in both clusters is not a good indicator. What you want to see is these people are hostile, these people are positive, and their word usage in that context is therefore more useful. So structure, it's there. It's there. It's there in everything. Every time you sent a text message, you were forming a part of a network. Every tweet, every reply, each mention and favorite and follow, it's creating this web of connections. And we sense it a little bit. Our language has some phrases for it. There's friend of a friend, 6 degrees of separation, word of mouth. We have some lingo for the idea that we're in this data structure and we're moving across this. What's different is that we're now moving into sort of the Google Maps era of the social landscape. We're getting there. We're not there yet, but and maybe people on the call don't quite remember the time before Google Maps, but there was a time before Google Maps, and it was MapQuest. It was terrible. You had to press buttons to move up and down. You couldn't just scroll. You couldn't do the pinch thing. It was terrible. But even that, MapQuest was an enormous change. You used to have to go and get these things that were printed on paper. So the landscape of geography really changed when what was called geographic information systems just became Google Maps, and is something that I don't know about you, but I use all the time. What we're projecting forward here is the idea that we're going to hit a point where there's a kind of social layer that we did the geographic layer, but what lives on top of the geographic layer is the social layer. And it too has a structure. It has mountain ranges and valleys and rivers and that kind of thing. And we would like you and other analysts to develop that language of structure. And by introducing that, we think we clarify a great deal. We learn a lot about the nature of social media in a way that we wouldn't see it otherwise. So we create this kind of point and shoot camera. Maybe we can upgrade it to digital. Ultimately, nobody wants that camera anymore because it's on your phone. Your phone's probably a better camera than any of those cameras. And so we are this kind of camera-like thing that lets you go and collect the data and analyze the data and visualize the data in a way that reveals these patterns, because what we want you to really see is that messages encode patterns of connection. And when you can decode the message as a series of edges, insight is available. Who's the most important person? What are the segments? Those kinds of questions are answerable. And so what I'm going to, right, let's go here. So to round things out, I want to make it clear that often when we think about the statistics of some kind of complex system, we default to the normal curve, the Gaussian, the bell curve. And for a lot of purposes, the bell curve is a perfectly valid stand-in for the way things get distributed in some kind of complex system, like human height. This pretty much captures one of these curves somewhere in there. It's going to be a curve like this, because in the distribution of human height, there are no people shorter than 1 inch. Right? There are just no like, oh, well, we have molecular family. They're like this big, right? No, we don't have any of those units. We also don't have any 1,500 foot tall units. You know, when you're tall, you're 6'7", maybe you're 7 feet. I guess there are some humans who are 8 foot tall, 9 foot tall. Maybe I don't think there's anybody on Earth who's over 10 feet tall. And so the bottoms of the tails hit zero. Now, what I want you to do is now take this curve and see if it fits a different distribution in human societies, not just human height. Let's do wealth. How much money do different people have? So if this was the curve, this means there are no poor people. There's almost no poor people. There's a tiny little group of poor people, almost no poor people. Almost no rich people. Well, that's true. Oh, a tiny little group of rich people. And that almost all of us are middle class. And I'm a social scientist. I've been trained in this. I'm going to check for you. Let me go look, see if that's. No, not my planet, right? Which curve covers human wealth more accurately? This one, the power law distribution, right? An enormous number of utterly destitute humans, 1 billion and a half humans, $1 or less per day. They're surviving barely on this incredible impoverished group of people. All the way at the other end, I think there are 35,000 billionaires on Earth. I think there's 8.2, 8.4 billion humans. There are 35,000 billionaires on Earth. Okay, this curve looks a lot more like my observed reality. This is how things get distributed, where there really isn't a middle class. There's a tiny little, blip in the curve down at the knee of that curve, but it's really hard to be there, and there are not that many people. And so real wealth is scarce, real poverty is very common. Why does this have anything to do with social media? Well, social media is a lot more power law than it is normal curve. And that has enormous implications and consequences. If you take that concept on board, a lot of things about social media, assumptions about social media will change. And so in network theory, this is called preferential attachment, or the Matthew effect. In the Bible, it says something to the effect that to those who have much, more will be given. And get this, there's a second part to that. From those who have little, more will be taken. Man, those guys are socialists, I'm telling you. So we are talking about a phenomena that is well known, called preferential attachment. You may want to look at, there's a nifty Wikipedia page called the Internet Culture, or the 1990 rule, which basically says one person posts, 9 people hit the like button, 90 other people walk past with no interaction at all. And so it's not egalitarian, uniform, democratic. It's highly power law stratified. And it's a kind of winner take all, the rich get richer, hit driven FM radio. That's what social media is. It's not this wide open space where all may speak and all may be heard. And so this has consequences. It turns out both a blessing and a curse. 60% of all anti-vax content came from 12 accounts on Twitter back, and this is, back in 21, when Twitter was still trying to be, we'll leave that right there. And then, so it's a tiny fraction of the total population, the tail wags the dog. There's rarely more than 10 or 20 people. They are the influencers, thought leaders, and they control the agenda. They're the agenda setters. They set the topics. And so this is both a blessing and a curse. It means that if you are one of these people, great, and it takes a small group to kind of move the needle in public perception on a given topic, but it could be a pretty bad thing if it means that a very small group of people can move the needle and in a direction towards disinformation. So the question could be asked, how social is social media? I'm a sociologist. I'm going to give you a professional answer. Not very. How could that be? How could social media not be social? Well, let's define terms. So sociologists tend to think that there are these notions like cohesion, density, reciprocity. Reciprocity means if I say hello to you, you say hello back. That happens not at all 93% of the time on Twitter. 93% of all tweets never get a reply. So low reciprocity. And what about the remaining? There's 7% of the tweets that get a reply. How many replies do those tweets get? 3.5% of them get one reply. There's now 3.5% of the remaining tweets. 1.75% of those tweets get 2 replies. You see where we're going with this? It's a power law distribution. Very few people get the 100,000 replies. That never happens statistically. We're pointing at it. It happens. Statistically, it's wildly improbable. So reciprocity and density is, are we all here just to listen to one person, or are we talking to each other? In a social environment, we talk to each other. We are not all just enthralled with the speaker, the presenter, the movie, the screen. We're not just here to focus on that one point. We talk to each other. No, we don't. Not in social media for the most part. Now, let me bring out a caveat. Did I just say there was never any social in social media? No, I didn't. I said it was more rare than the name would imply, and that it is indicated by density and reciprocity, and that is hard to find. Not impossible, but like diamonds, they are rare. There's not a lot of cohesion, density, and reciprocity on the social web. How much community was there in online community? Not a lot. Not a lot. And again, not none. And therefore, when you found it, it was precious. But don't just presume it. And you know, it's a very American thing. We name the thing for what we want it to be, but it's not what it is. So here's the, you know, a point to be made is people heard two promises. They were only made one promise. The promise of social media is that all may speak. What people heard was that all would be heard. That doesn't happen. Statistically, observationally, empirically, based on data, that doesn't happen. The average person likes something in social media and they become part of the swarm, that wagon wheel, that point at a hub. So I just want to wrap up with these thoughts. That guy is Luca Pacioli. And the painting is about a time in 1494 when the dude behind him, who is the Pope, told him, hey, you read Arabic, right? And Latin. Why don't you do some translation work for me? And in 1494, he writes this mathematics textbook, and in it are two chapters. And in those two chapters, he explains double entry bookkeeping. In Europe, there was no concept of accounting. There were no records, no financial records that made sense and had error correction built in. 1494, this guy comes up with, he translates from the Arab-speaking world the concepts of double entry bookkeeping. And you may remember from history, shortly thereafter, capitalism is born. And we blame him. We like to argue that social media is a kind of marketplace for ideas. Not all those ideas are good ideas. COVID is a hoax, masks don't work. Those are ideas, and they moved through the network with great facility, and no accounting system was in place to call out the fact that they may have been low quality ideas. And so the cost of low quality, and there is a famous paper, the market for lemons, when there is no cost for having low quality goods in the market, you get a lot of low quality goods in the market. When there is a cost for having low quality goods in the market, there is a selection pressure that pushes people towards higher quality goods. What would that look like? We may need accounting software and accountants for the marketplaces of ideas. That may be communications scholars using advanced tools like networks to measure and map the patterns in social media to reveal, is there fraud? Now, again, a caveat, is accounting necessary and sufficient to remove fraud from a marketplace? No, it's just necessary. It's necessary, but not sufficient. So we're going to need it, even though it's not going to just cure our problems. So what I want to show you in the last couple of seconds here is this is what our next generation accounting interface for these platforms looks like. This is what we call Node XL Pro Insights. It's a tool that lets us look at this data not just as a spreadsheet, but also as an interface. And I think we have a chat, and I'm going to drop the link in the chat. There you go. So you can join me on this interface, and it's one of the nifty things about Insights is that you can distribute it to others just by giving them a link, and pretty much anybody, Mac user, Linux user, anybody with a browser can interact with this thing. But what it's going to let us do is project the data into different kind of templates. It's going to let us recognize that in social media, there's just a little bit of dimensionality. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's a user, there's a message, it could have a URL on it, it could have a photo. It came at a time, it came from a location, it went to a hashtag, it had a bunch of words. The people in that now have network metrics, they have location data, they have text data. It gets complicated. But when we project it into a dashboard, we can now ask the question, where do people tweet when they tweet about Ohio U? Is it Asia? No. Is it South America? No. Is it Africa? No. Okay, so it's North America. Okay, fine. Where in North America? Double click, double click, double click. We'll do a little dragging. We're now zooming in. Is it North Dakota? No. Okay, and in some ways that's obvious. Well, we're in Ohio. It's in the name of the university. I get it. I understand. But now if it hadn't been, I mean, after all, is Miami University in Miami? Insider Ohio knowledge that's being displayed there. So this allows us not only to drill down and see the distribution, but we would even be able, I bet we're going to find where the campus is, right? So campus is here? Or is that just Columbus? You're in Athens, that's right. So you're down here. And so we can actually start clicking on these people and seeing who are those people who said that their location was Athens? Who are those people and how is their content different from the people who are up in Columbus? Because they're talking about you too. Maybe when Columbus people talk about you, they're really talking about the football team. And when you guys talk about yourself, you may actually be talking about the fact that it's actually a university, right? You're also doing this education thing on the side. So we want to make it possible for you to click through these dashboard facets and begin to do the two tasks that we learned from our users that they wanted to perform that we didn't know at first. We had this vision that we were going to do 5 things for our users: collect and store their social media data, analyze it, visualize it, and write a report. We did that. That's what you can see over in the NodeXL Graph Gallery. And then they told us they've got 2 other jobs they need done, and those jobs are called explore and explain. They need to explore the data, they need to explain the data. We believe this interface provides support for that explore and explain task. I hope you'll take a few moments and play with it yourself. You'll find that there are many different pages you can navigate to, and I hope some of them will reveal things like, who are the top people and what were the top topics and the top hashtags and all of that. Using this, you might spend those 3 or 4 hours that you could have spent consuming 2,400 tweets, and instead use those 2 to 4 hours drilling into well-organized, analyzed data. And so you're no doubt going to be more interested in the people in this quadrant than the people in this quadrant. And so guiding the scarce resources and attention of an analyst is definitely our focus. I think I didn't time it right. I apologize, Professor Khan. If there is a second or 2 remaining, I'm happy to take questions, and I apologize for reducing the amount of time for questions.
No problem. Thank you very much, Mark. That was a very insightful presentation by myself. Looking at the newer interface, learned a great deal. So thank you for that. Any questions from anyone? Now's the time.
info@smrfoundation.org. We're happy to hear from you. If you do email me at info@smrfoundation.org, I'm happy to send you a trial license for NodeXL desktop. I'm happy to hear from you about a hashtag or a topic or a platform that you're interested in. It is our goal at the Social Media Research Foundation to be, we like to think that we're a catalyst for scholarship, and we're going to provide the tools, and we will provide the support for the use of those tools. I just will show you as a last illustration of what we've been up to. WhatsApp. If you know what it is, then you're not an American, but there are a lot of WhatsApp users on the planet, and a WhatsApp data file kind of looks like this. It's a date and a time and a username and a message. We, NodeXL, now notice that you can go into WhatsApp and tap on the profile for a chat, scroll, scroll, scroll. Down here, you see this button, export chat. Export that chat. And then what do you get? Well, you get this file, and that's going to be a file _chat.txt. Then you come to this dialog box right here, and it is NodeXL asking you, which of these _chat.txt files would you like me to analyze, and how would you like me to analyze them? And what do you get? You get this. You get a diagram of who talks to who and how much and when. This was just a little diagram of the team. My group, we've got 5 or 6 people. We talk to each other, and we made a little network. This, however, I have removed all the names. the data is gone. There are privacy considerations. But this is a chat in WhatsApp from Britain, from London in the UK. And those are people who are negotiating between food providers and food banks and people who are hungry. And so we're really seeing collective action. We're seeing computer mediated collective action. And we're actually seeing the fact that these are the coordinators, these are hungry people, these are food providers. We did that in under 3 minutes. And so that's insight into computer mediated collective action. No doubt more scholarships do. You're going to read some of those messages. You're going to go and do some site ethnography perhaps, but this is a way of extracting information and really revealing its structure in a way that just a few clicks are going to take in terms of cost of doing that. So info@smrfoundation.org, trial licenses, happy to do one-on-ones to hear about research projects. I would say one of our greatest satisfactions is that we run training throughout the year, and we've now gotten to the point, we've done it for about 3 or 4 years, that we have students who have come in early, learned the tool, written a paper, come back, presented that paper at our winter and summer schools. So we'd love to see you at those events.
Thank you, Mark. This was very insightful. Actually, now looking at the WhatsApp, the way it could be visualized, I'm not aware of any other tools that can do that. So this could in itself be another session, but I'm afraid this is all we have time for today.
Understood.
So we're going to wrap up our session today. And I am sure that you greatly benefited and learned from this. Thank you again, Marc. And thank you for all those who attended and listened to our research symposium. See you again with another insightful session right here with me. Keep connected and have a great day.